before we get started, does anybody have any questions about what's going on, any of the mechanisms, syllabus, assignments, anything like that? Yeah.
And I don't remember if I asked you last week, but do you accept rough drafts for the images essay? Or?
Yeah, so as long as I get it like a week or so before so that I can have some time to respond to it. Yeah, so, you know, it's, I won't grade it, but I can give you some feedback as to, you know, if there's something missing or if you're on the right track, that kind of thing. You can send it to me by email. You don't have to upload that to Blackboard. Yes?
Regarding the online discussion, how exactly do you want us to respond, what format, so that we can receive the maximum grade on it?
How do I want you to respond? But it's not really in terms of format, it's just in terms of if you are making, you know, a comment, a reaction, if you are adding to the discussion in some way. I know that's not very specific, but, you know, if you say something like, you know, I agree, you know, that's sort of self-evidently not adding to the discussion. But if you say, you know, Joe mentioned such and so, and you know, I think that's also borne out by this other passage that says something similar. Or, you know, I remember in class we talked about, you know, how such and so, and that seems to be showing up here. Or, you know, or I think that, you know, the way that this is talked about here, you know, maybe it can be looked at in a different way. I also don't, you know, we don't need to go, you know, you're wrong. Obviously, it's something else. You know, there's a certain amount of etiquette expected. But contributing to the discussion is the short end of that. Is that okay? So, if you are making a comment of some kind in reaction to the original reading, and you are making a second comment that contributes to the discussion as it unfolds, then you should be in good shape. You know, I'm not evaluating the logic or the rhetoric so much as the fact that you are helping to grow the discussion. Was that it? Yeah.
So by Sunday is when you grade Thursday's discussion?
Sunday's when it closes, and I end up doing the grading when I get a chance.
Okay.
So probably it happens around the same time I do the quizzes. So I will probably do the quizzes tomorrow, and I'll post updated grades. There's some people that had. Well, anyway. So you know, anything that you're curious about in terms of how a certain grade ended up happening for any assignment, please make sure to touch base with me. Remember that for the images essay, how I grade the formal essays, the images essay and the paper that's due, the research paper that's due at the end of the semester, is spelled out on the requirements for all papers page. So that tells you what's required and what I grade for and what I take off points for. So before you upload, you know, your images essay, make sure that you have taken a look at that and have a sense of what it is that I'm actually looking at. Make sure that you have answered the questions for the assignment, but also that you have the necessary components that are required for all papers. Other questions? Yes.
This is a question unrelated, kind of, but I wanted to know if you know what type of master's degree we can pursue with a history bachelor's.
What kind of master's degree? Well, there is a master's degree program here at Lehman that is in history, but I don't know the specifics of what's available in terms of concentrations. It would mostly be in terms of who you would be able to study with. So what I would do is, I believe the graduate advisor is Professor Renike. So you can talk to Professor Renike or Professor Valentine if you're interested in pursuing advanced graduate study here. If you're interested in something more than the master's level in history, the Graduate Center, the CUNY Graduate Center, offers a PhD in history with a number of different areas of concentration. My PhD in ancient history is from the CUNY Graduate Center. We have some very strong Americanists and Europeanists, but there are also some people who study ancient and medieval history. So that's available as an option too. Yes?
Are you going to assign the picture image or?
Am I going to assign the picture?
Yeah, or we have to pick
For the images essay?
Yeah.
You pick what you want. So once you've chosen which option you're interested in, either the film option or the museum option, then you need to choose the works that you're going to study. So for the film option, there's a list of potential possibilities at the bottom of the images essay page. For the museum option, I think it would make sense just to go to a museum if you can and spend some time exploring what's on exhibit and see if you find two pieces that are most that seem like they would be useful for this assignment. Two pieces that are the same subject but are from different times or different places. You can pre-game that by looking at what's on exhibit via the museum website, so you don't want to make it quite as hit or miss. But art is something that speaks to you, so find something that you're interested in. If you're not sure if something would work for the assignment, drop me an email and I will be happy to discuss it with you. Other questions? Okay, so I forgot to plug in my clicker. The upcoming assignment we already know about.
Sorry, do you happen to find a black thermos in here?
Anybody see a black thermos?
It should be at the podium. If it's not that, there it's fine.
I don't see it, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
All right. We have a quiz this week. Remember that I was very glad to see that everybody found the quiz and was able to work the mechanism for it. And in other words, that the technology was working, even though I was having a bad technology week last week. And the questions for the quizzes, some of the questions for the quizzes will come up in the class discussion, so it's helpful to be alert, I guess. Images essay, remember we're not meeting for the next 2 weeks because of holidays. All right, so let's talk about last week's reading first, real quick. What did you guys make of the poem of the righteous sufferer? What does this tell us about this culture, about the Babylonian culture that it comes from? What do you think what's the bottom line for this reading? What did you take away from this reading? Yes?
People's faith in the God is so crucial to the point if you don't have faith in what's God's name? It was
Marduk is the overall one.
right. That was like the most powerful God in that civilization. And if you have no faith in him, he's gonna torture you with all these different type of curses that you have to go through in different stages until your faith in him is on expectation. Then he would consider to heal you of these curses and release your sins.
And the protagonist's attitude toward all of this, how does he feel about all of this? Yeah.
Throughout his tribulations, he's humble,
Uh-huh.
hoping that Marduk will change his mind.
So patient, yeah, and what were you going to say? No?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't.
Okay. So what is this telling us then about the relationship that the Babylonians have with the gods? There's so many gods in Babylon, and yet it seems like the only opinion that matters in the end, the only relationship that matters in the end, is with Marduk. So why are there even all these other gods to begin with? This pantheon is complex and difficult and unpredictable. And it has to be that way for a reason. Why is this situation set up in such a way so that people end up dealing with all of these complicated problems, dealing with all of these gods at cross purposes, and yet the only thing that matters is Marduk in the end. The nature of this is something that suggests that patience and that suffering are there for a reason. The interactions with all of these gods are there for a reason. Where do you think that comes from? Why do you think this system is set up like this? What does this tell us about how the people think about Marduk and the other gods? This is a complicated question, but not terribly well phrased. But what's your impression of how they think about this system, where they end up having to deal with all of these interacting gods with their own agendas, and have to put up with all of this to get to the ending point? What does this suggest to you about how they think about life itself? There's something there there's a purpose that's intrinsic to this poem. There's a purpose. This poem is written in order to... let me put it this way. This poem is written to express something. What is this poem written to express? What is the purpose of this poem? Because everything is written for a reason. Yeah.
I felt like when everything around him was crashing, I feel like it was just trying to have him hone in only on his relationship with God, so try to get rid of the other distractions in his life, like his job, his family-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's, I guess how that relates to life is like something, getting rid of distractions or things that don't really matter so that you can focus on what really does matter in life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that the message is that if you keep being persistent, at the end there will be a reward. If you keep your faith, that's what I mean is good.
Mm-hmm. And there's the author of the poem is expressing a certain amount of pride. It isn't simply just patience. It isn't simply just endurance. The title is The Pious Sufferer. And these two things are equated. So, if you deal with all the difficulties that, the harsh life of living in this part of the world and dealing with other people produces for you, and that's represented, that's symbolized by all of these petty, literally petty gods that inflict their own individual agendas on you and cause your life to go haywire in all of these small ways. The definition of piety is suffering. And part of the pride of this author is, I've endured all of this suffering. in order to prove my belief, my loyalty, in order to gain that reward. But it's very interesting that piety is being equated with suffering. How did you guys react to that? What is it? Why would piety and suffering be the same thing? Wouldn't somebody who just received rewards be the favorite of the gods? Why would somebody who is suffering and being punished by the gods be somebody held up as being, somebody you would want to hold up as being the highest level of believer? Yeah.
I guess the author of the poem is set up as an image for what every man should strive to be. Like I said, faith is like everything the poem is talking about. You have to have a strong faith towards Marduk. That's like the number one thing men should consider about and should practice in your lifestyles and such.
Right, so this is a model of behavior. This is how you should react no matter what's thrown at you. Yeah.
I also believe the man explained that he was, what was he doing? Not speaking of God in vain, but kind of, what was he doing? He didn't have enough fear of God at first, before he started suffering.
Right, so this suffering and the process of coming before Marduk is a journey of education, of becoming a more, a more understanding, a more enlightened person. This is in many ways akin to what we read last week. The overall arc of the Epic of Gilgamesh involves Gilgamesh having to become more sober, more mature, more understanding. The nature of mortals is to be frivolous and petty, like the smaller gods. You have to level up through suffering in order to be on the same level as Marduk, to be worthy of a true relationship with Marduk. Yeah.
And I believe that he said that Marduk could have found it abomination to kind of be too much in tune with like material wealth and stuff like that.
Right.
So when he started suffering and going through pain, poverty, homelessness, losing all of his like luxuries, is when he learned his true strength as a person, and that he was able to appreciate what God.
Right. So remember that when you're trying to become rich, that you will not be worthy of Marduk. What other reactions did you guys have? Anything stand out to any of you as being interesting or unexpected in the poem of the righteous sufferer? Anything strike you as being strange or curious that you? Yeah.
Upon the end, like when the author was released off his sentence, it wasn't actually Marduk itself who healed all of the curses. It was like some guy who just randomly sent it.
Right,
Like,
an adjutant of.
I found that to be interesting because I thought Marduk would just go himself and.
Which that is very interesting. Why would that be? Why is it that we have even at the climax of the poem somebody acting on? We get an agent of Marduk. Why do you think that would be? Yeah.
Maybe it could be symbolic to the relation of how this idea of religion plays over and over in the past and in the future. Like there's always a messenger of God, but God never actually comes down himself to speak to us or.
Right, because which suggests to us, yeah. So we have this, with other religions as well. It happens with Judaism, and we see this in other places. Hermes is messenger of Zeus and this kind of thing. But especially here, Marduk is so potent compared to the rest of the pantheon that he is, at another level of reality. It's one of those situations where he's beyond anthropomorphic. Anthropomorphic gods, like all these other gods, you can interact with and connect with because they have human faces and human ways of thinking and human methodologies. But Marduk has been built up in potency by the need for Babylon to be the most important city in the world. They've aggrandized their patron god to being not just the king of the gods, but a god of the gods. And so it's not something that a normal human would interact with or would understand. This is also part of, this is something that came up in last week's reading about the Babylonians and the Assyrians developing this idea of a personal God as a way of having a direct influence on people's lives, which Marduk isn't a personal God, but what this flags for the Babylonians and the Assyrians is that once you start trying to have this personal God thing, you become more and more aware of how unresponsive the gods are. It's like you're praying for things every day, and you're looking for all this fine-tuning and so forth, and you don't hear bupkis from the gods. And this forces the entire culture to develop a sense that the gods are more remote, more aloof, more incomprehensible. And this is especially true of the ultimate god in this pantheon, Marduk. So the gods are more to remove, and the means of interacting with them. Remember, we have that tripartite system, right? We have the divine world, which is a completely enclosed system, and we have the human society, and then we have the ritualized means of interaction. The practices that allow an interface between these entirely separate worlds, right? And in this case, because the gods are more remote, more incomprehensible, the means of interaction with them is not simply prayer and ritual. The means of interacting with them is ultimately an extended period of suffering in order to undergo the improvement, the education necessary to truly be able to interact. That's my opinion, anyway. Any other reactions to the poem of the Righteous Sufferer? All right. So let us talk about religion in contact. So this plays off of our discussion from last week. Last week we were talking about the ways in which, the ancient world is this patchwork of all of these different local religions. Everywhere you go, religion is different. Religion is connected to the place that you are and the culture that's been developed there. And then on top of that, the point that's being made in this chapter is that in all of those places, in the entirety of the ancient world, every individual belongs to multiple religions. What does that mean? What does that mean when I say that? How does one person belong to multiple religions? Yeah.
I think at one point they were talking about how you can have your local religion or your local god, and then, like in the Roman Empire, you had your local belief system, but then you were somehow obligated to the official public Roman gods, like your position in society, whatever it was.
Right. And there are more levels than that. Even at the most basic level, you have the personal gods of your own household. So each individual belongs to, has obligations to, what we would think of as different religions, different religious systems. Everywhere in the ancient world, people are connected to family gods in some way. And these family gods are, as the book pointed out, autonomous. So what do we mean by this? Household gods. It's different in every place. But it's a standard aspect of pagan religion that the house that you live in and the family that you belong to has its own set of traditions and family rituals connected to the land and property that you have and the ancestors that have lived there. In some places, this plays out, in a very formal way, and there's an actual set of icons or something like this that are physical representations. Sometimes it's focused around the hearth and the way that food is brought from the hearth has a religious aspect that is tied to the protection of the spirits of the land or the memories of ancestors. But whatever this is, what you do in relation to your household gods is completely separate and independent from, the big gods of the state. Your household gods are not, the big names. Your household gods are not Jupiter or Zeus or Apollo or Athena. Household gods are often, nameless collections of spirits that represent, your ties and obligations to the land and the ability of the land to take care of it. And then on top of that, the social group that you belong to often has religious aspects. And so, for example, in Rome there were crossroads leagues, associations of residents and businesses that were bound together, that were joined together by, the nearest crossroad. That they had an obligation to take care of, to manage and curate. There would often be a fountain there or a bath that would be their responsibility to take care of. Obviously, this is mainly a civic responsibility, but it's imbued with a religious character. It's imbued with a sacred obligation that involves, betraying that, failing to undertake that responsibility, therefore brings down upon you the risk of divine wrath. And, bad business, people not coming to your shop anymore, people passing bad checks, whatever. Or fire or whatever. And so these kinds of things are prevalent. Small social groups within the community would have religious connections. So most obvious of these are military units, which often have a central standard that has a sacred character. This is, again, especially true for the Romans, but we see it elsewhere For the Romans, the eagle was a religious icon. The standard of your legion was a religious icon, and you were connected. The fates of you and the rest of your legion and your commander are connected by being sworn to this legion and fighting under this standard. And then you have the gods of the state, and even that can be complicated if you were living in a colony. The gods of your state might be connected or merged with the gods of the people that sent that colony, or if you're living in an enclave, if you're an immigrant and you're living in an enclave surrounded by the population of the land that you moved into, then you might have a mixed set of obligations to gods that are associated with your people, as well as the gods of the people you're living among. The point is that religion for everybody in the ancient world is a complex set of overlapping obligations. And the people that are experiencing this, aren't thinking, okay, I have a religion A, religion B, and religion C. They're thinking, this is the circumstances of my religion. The religion that I experience as a member of my family is this, my household gods, and this, the social group that I belong to, and this, the state that I live in. And so in a way, not only does everybody have a complex religion, a series of multiple religions, but everybody has a slightly different religion. Religion is personal. Not because the gods interact with you, but because your circumstances, where you live, what family you belong to, are what determine it. And so as a result of that, there's no proselytizing, there's no efforts to convert in the ancient world. Because pagan religion is determined by the family and place you're born into. That changes later, but remember that the ancient world is thousands of years. And Christianity, the revolution that changes everything, only comes at the far end of that. So when we're talking about ancient history, we are talking about, the vast quantity of it is nothing but polytheistic pagans with the complexities of religion that each person experiences because of the family and place that they're born into. So, given that that religion is determined by who you are, under what circumstances would you end up with persecution of religion? Why would people bother to persecute religion if it's something that has nothing to do with individual choice? Yeah.
Well, like the third one was public religion, and if there's people who are against that, then they could be persecuted.
If there's people that were against
The public religion, like the state religion,
that
were outwardly opposed to it.
Well, let's see. So how would that happen, though? Because if you're living in a particular community, your public religion is going to be the same for everyone. So under what circumstances, how would you get that situation? How would you end up with a situation where you have people that are opposed to the overall religion? Yeah.
maybe you have a different way of believing and a different religion, and they do not approve it.
Okay, so if you have a community that has their own religion that's different from yours, that other religion can be seen as a threat, and this would happen. In cases of conquest potentially, although it doesn't actually normally happen that way. But in cases where you're attempting to conquer somebody, at least at the beginning, you would be, painting that opposing religion as evil or barbaric or whatever. And then, the way in which that plays out is afterwards, the process of integration starts to happen instead. But okay, so that's one situation. How else would you end up with one religion opposed to it? Yeah.
Maybe that the gods did something so egregious that the people stop believing in them, stop having faith in them. So then they decide maybe we'll go.
That's a very good point. Yeah, if there's disillusionment, what might happen is that people who experience that disillusionment end up forming their own religion, which we would refer to as a cult. Cult is the general term for a system of rituals and beliefs, and with the emphasis being on system. And so last week we talked about cult as being the system of rites and rituals that a community uses to interface with, to interact with the divine world. And so what you get in this kind of situation is you no longer adhere to the gods of the state. You form your own system. So the question is, why would a community not just be like, well, okay, religion is different for everybody. Just go on and you do you. Why would that be a problem? Why would that lead to oppression and persecution? Yeah.
It could possibly threaten political power.
They could threaten. How so?
If you get, for say one cult, for example, gathers a lot of supporters to believe in their belief system, but it goes against whatever is in power, then they have the multitude on their side.
Right. So it ends up being a rival identity. One of the things that's critical for having a community that prospers together is the need for everybody in it to think of the community ahead of themselves. You have to think of the community ahead of your own personal needs. And that means forging an identity where you say, I am a Roman, I am a Uruk, I am a Hittite. That's more important. And that allows for the prosperity of the community. The unity of that identity is what makes possible the survival of a civilization. And if there's an identity within that is subverting that is undermining that unity, that is a political threat. The religious part of it only matters in that it's forming an identity. Yes?
I just wanted to add on what she said about political power. It was actually from one of my favorite movies as a child, The Prince of Egypt.
Uh-huh.
The pharaohs, they kept calling themselves gods, the morning and the evening star. Then out of nowhere, Moses, with his God, the God, comes up and threatens that power.
Mm-hmm.
The pharaoh is not all as mighty as we thought.
Right, yeah. The problem with Moses and the Jews, especially in fictional representations is that they represent a political threat to the pharaoh. And this in Egypt is especially in religious terms because the Egyptian king, as we will see in a few weeks, is also a god. A very rare example of a god king. It doesn't happen anywhere else except for Egypt. In that way. And so, but you know, the same thing happens with the emergence of any kind of cult, but especially the mystery cult. Mystery cult. Anybody have a sense of what a mystery cult is? You can kind of guess from the name what a mystery cult might be. If it's a cult, it's a system of beliefs and rituals. And if it's a mystery, that means that only the adherents, only the members of the community are aware of those beliefs and rituals. It's kept a secret what it is exactly they do. And so a mystery cult in particular, because it's more opaque, might be singled out as a political threat and brought to a negative end. So what's more likely to happen is influence and integration. And we talked about some of the ways in which this happens. The main thing to bear in mind is that integration involves the rites, the festivals, the means of interaction. Integration involves the mechanisms of interacting with the gods, but not the gods themselves. You know, mortal men and women can't change the gods. And so integration is about the tools of interaction, so that, you know, if you end up with if you end up expanding in a particular area, you acquire rituals and officials and things that are part of the cultural legacy of that area. But the gods remain the same. And so, for example, we have the convergence of different kinds of cultural influences within empires, and they end up existing side by side, and yet don't affect the overall pantheon. So why would you have, just for an example, that comes up from the text? The text talks about how the Romans ended up with Roman rites and Greek rites. So some of the rituals that they performed were done in a Roman way, but as they expanded into the Greek world, some of the rituals that they performed were done in a Greek way. And so, you know, they had this setup where, you know, certain things would be on the list of things that were Roman rites, and certain things were on the list of things that were Greek rites. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just Romanize all of your rituals? Why wouldn't you do it all the same way. Why would you not homogenize all of your rituals and do them in the way that Romans do them? Yeah.
I think for particularly the Roman example, could it have been adoration or admiring the Greeks in certain ways? But I think also it's a good use of maintaining your power if you integrate the people that you are controlling over.
Right. So this is a way of interacting with the Greeks as well as Go ahead. Oh, that's not okay. So this is a part of it, but what else? What else might be a factor in having these two sets of systems side by side? You might have admiration for the other culture, but you might not, and you might want to appease members of the other culture, but you might not. What would condition? What would cause you to need to keep two different sets of a foreign right and your own right as part of your religious process? Why would you tolerate having foreign rituals as part of this very important process of interacting with the gods? No thoughts on that at all, huh?
Could it be possible that if you have different options? Like, I remember the first reading that we had, we were talking about religious shopping and how you keep your options open, like in terms of what kind of rituals you do to appease the gods. So integrating different cultures and traditions, wouldn't that lead the Romans to be able to, like, if I created this god and it doesn't work, I can go to this god, do this to maybe get a result?
Right. It increases the ways in which you can interact with the divine. So it improves the possibilities of interaction. It broadens the channels of communication by having these different routes, these different ways of interacting. Even more basically, though, in the Roman case, the Greek rites are Greek rites because the origins of the gods involved are Greek, and so they need to be spoken to in a Greek way. You remember what you're doing here. You're talking to the gods. You're trying to get the gods to understand your needs. And so, if a god has origins from the Greek part of the lands you're ruling over, then you need to speak to that god in a way that the god understands. That's the point of ritual, is communication with the gods. And so this is what determines. Part of it is what works. And what works is contingent upon the nature of your culture and the nature of the gods involved. In order to create the best possible communication. Whatever ritual is going to make that happen in order to benefit your community, that's what you're going to do, even if you have to tolerate having foreign-style rites as a part of your religious system. When you do have gods imported because you've expanded into a territory, that ends up being a possibility of integration because, in a situation like that, the gods are still bound to that land, but now that land is a part of your land. And so you need to make sure that you're communicating with the entirety of what is now the divine world of your expanded territory. You need to be able to speak to all of the gods. And so you have to expand your pantheon. This is why if you expand your empire, you don't impose your religion on the inhabitants in the ancient world, because pagan religions are connected to the land. They don't export. But more importantly, you're threatening their identity. But more importantly, those gods are there. They're your gods now. If you're ruling over that territory, these are your lands. You have to interact with them in order to protect your lands and people. Yes?
And maybe they feel it's more adaptable for them to take influence from former religions and convert it into something new, so it's like, it's not that different. But
right. So, if you are, what sometimes happens is your existing religious components are merged with the religious components of places you've expanded into. And this happens with the Hittites, so that when they expand into the lands of the Hittians and the Hurrians, the Hittites already have hundreds of gods, and then the Hittians have even more gods, and the Hurrians have even more gods. And so, what they ended up doing was synchronization. Synchronization is where you say, where you have two unlike things that you connect together through what they have in common. So the most famous example of this is, when the Romans started to rule over the Greeks, they syncretized some aspects of their religion. So they said that, well, your Zeus is essentially the same as our Jupiter. In fact, they're very, very different, but they're both sky gods. And so, they were able to fudge, connecting the system together by saying that Zeus and Jupiter were different aspects of the same entity. The Hittites do this with the Hurrian god, so that the Hurrian thunder god is equated with the Hittite thunder god, even though their stories and the shape of their personalities are different. The symbolisms that's used for them is different. They're connected together in order to have a simpler system and to reinforce the overall identity, to make the Hurrians feel more like they're part of the Hittite culture. Yes.
Also language, because everyone spoke and wrote in Greek, so Rome would have to somewhat adapt.
Right. Yeah. So the nature of the rituals and the way that the gods are talked about, you end up with stories in Greek about Roman gods, and the boundaries end up getting fuzzed with that. The Hittites would experience the same thing with the Hurrians, because the Hittites speak an Indo-European language, and the Hurrians speak a Semitic language, and so the contextualization of these stories and the shape of the gods is conditioned by language. Yes. Yes.
I think that the synchronization between the goddess of the water and Isis and Mary is interesting, because there is another, I don't know, it's like a religion, a Cuban African religion, where they refer to a goddess of water, but also she's like depicted as Mary. It's called Caridad. And people apparently can pray to this saint and receive material wealth. Mm-hmm. It's rumored. So I find that interesting, how the synchronization of actually Isis and then Mother Mary can result in a cultic worship that can bring material wealth. I don't know how that actually exists, but it does.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of the whole Roman story. What actually happens with Isis is that there are several related female sort of super goddesses in that part of the world. So last week we saw Ishtar, who is the Babylonian version of the Sumerian Inanna. Inanna is the Sumerian goddess of fertility and war. And, it's actually Inanna who originally tempts Gilgamesh. And when the story is, when the Babylonians and Akkadians conquer Sumer, they absorb the culture and they syncretize. They say Inanna is the same as their Ishtar, and they start telling Inanna's stories. They start saying that it was Ishtar. And so that's the version of the Epic of Gilgamesh that we actually end up with. And Isis is thought to be an echo of the same idea from early contact between these peoples. And Isis ends up being brought into the Roman pantheon as her own cult. When the Romans absorbed Egypt, they add Isis to the Roman pantheon, and Isis becomes this female, extremely powerful intercessor figure. And so when Romans are converted to Christianity, that special potency is the legacy that Mary picks up. And so she fulfills that same role of taking care of people that the other gods aren't taken care of. So you have these processes where you acquire and integrate the tools of interaction. You acquire gods that belong to lands that you have expanded into, and that includes, not only imperial expansion, but also places like colonies where the local gods might be dealt with by the empire's means of interaction. At the very least, you would have temples and priests and so forth, and revenue that is connected to the empire's system, even if the mythology and rituals stay connected to the original indigenous population. And so the upshot of this is that the different kinds of rituals are likely to coexist. It's not just that it sometimes happens, but in any kind of community that's not purely isolated, there's going to be different sets of rituals alongside each other. Rituals that are from the distant past, rituals that are from colonies and migrants, rituals that are from expansion and contraction, rituals that are from new gods. The system of rituals and relationships with the gods is usually heterogeneous, is usually complex, and is usually changing over time.
Can you go back a little bit, sir?
Sorry?
Can you go back? I don't know.
Sorry. Remember, the slides are posted on the website too, so you can always go back and take a look at them. So the nature of expansion brings up the situation where people can connect to different kinds of gods. And so you end up with conquered communities being normalized into the system of the conquerors, but remaining connected to their local gods. And so, the Hittites that acquire all of these Hattian and Hurrian gods, they attempt to create an overarching understanding, an overarching system that includes all of their different kinds of rituals, all of their different kinds of gods, and express it under a single set of processes that is managed by a single set of officials and that is appealed to, perhaps this is most important, that is appealed to as a heterogeneous whole. In other words, as you were saying, if we're in this situation, we need to appeal to the gods. We have this option, which is Hittites. We have this option, which is Hittites. And we have this option, which is Hurrian. And we can try all three of these in order to produce the results that we need. Conversion to ruler citizenship still involves mixed obligations. So this goes back to what I was talking about before, the way in which people can be integrated into an exterior culture still involves levels of complexity. The most obvious example of this is if you are a subject people of the Roman Empire and you end up with obligations to Rome, but you're living in some other part of the empire, you might still end up. So you end up with religious obligations to Rome and to your local community. This is especially true if you are brought into the military. If you are drafted into the Roman legions, then you will have your own family obligations, your local social obligations, your obligations to Rome and your obligations to the military unit that you belong to and the sacred eagle that you fight under. So attempts at unification don't get very far. Various empires try ways to simplify their systems, especially if they start to feel that individual local religions can be a threat. And so, the Roman Empire attempts to spread emperor worship in the provinces. That doesn't get very far. They attempt to create a unified sun god that everybody can believe in, because everybody has a son called Sol Invictus. But Sol Invictus doesn't get very far. The only thing that works is something that creates a rival identity, which is Christianity. Like I said, that's all the way at the end of our story. And at the same time, you have forces of diversification working against you within an empire that reinforce the differences amongst the people that inhabit your subject peoples. All right, so let's contextualize this with the Hittites. A little background on the Hittites. The Hittites are an Indo-European people. What does Indo-European mean? Indo-European refers to the people that lived north of the Black Sea thousands of years ago, who were a pastoral, non-urban, tribal people who depended upon the grazing of animals to survive. And as their population expands, you need more grazing lands, and so they ended up having their tribes migrate into new territories on a regular basis over the course of the ancient era. This is a non-literate people, so we don't have any literary records of them. but we are able to connect the peoples that descend from the Indo-Europeans through language. In the ancient world, you need to write this down, but in the ancient world there are certain populations that are not related linguistically to anyone else. The Sumerians we've looked at last week are one of them. And then we can connect a whole bunch of people in the ancient world through the fact that their languages have a common origin. The Indo-European language. The Hittites are the first of these, but the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, the Hindus, all of these people descend from, have a common ancestry in this tribal, non-urban, pastoral people that lived in the grasslands of the Ukraine thousands of years ago. And then we have the Semitic language groups and the Afro-Asian language groups. We have people that are connected to each other in other ways. But we can look at the Indo-Europeans and see the connection to their language through cognates, through words that are that have an obviously common origin in all these different languages. The story goes that the British were ruling over India, and one of the lords that was put in charge of a particular area said, I should research how the locals understand justice so that I can better relate to them when I'm holding court. And so he already knows Latin and Greek because he's a British elite, but he learns Sanskrit, which is the ancient local language, and he discovers that Sanskrit is very closely related to Greek and Latin. And this unearths something that was previously not known, that Greeks and Latins and Hindus and Hittites and Germans and Slavs, all these people have a common ancestry. Not only that, but we can find out about what life was like for the Indo-Europeans through language. Because we can look at what kinds of words exist in the Indo-European language and what words they have to borrow when they migrate into the Mediterranean world. And so, we can find that, for example, the Indo-Europeans were masters of carts and wheels and axles, which is, the axle in terms of significant load bearing is advanced technology. Not that the people of the Mediterranean were capable of it, but the people of the Mediterranean moved goods and peoples by boat. They didn't need carts and wagons the way that the Indo-Europeans did. And they didn't have the quantities of draft animals to be able to use them in great numbers anyway. So, we can reconstruct from things like their use of the wagon and their ability to put that axle technology to use in warfare. I always feel bad for this little guy. We can reconstruct Indo-European society. They're farmers and stock breeders. They have words for kinds of herds and for particular kinds of animals. But they don't have words for olives or grapes. They don't have words for saltwater fish. They don't have the kinds of words that they had to borrow when they migrated into the Mediterranean. Their origins are in a temperate zone, so they have words for the kinds of trees and animals that exist in a land with summers and winters and autumns and springs, but not for the kinds of flora and fauna that exist in the Mediterranean world. They have words for tribes and chieftains, but not words for cities and councils and senates. They have words for that describe a loosely knit collection of clans and tribes, but not for strict social organization, not for anything urban or organized in that way. And they seem to be, there's one theory that they seem to think of themselves as loosely divided into three kinds of roles. The clerical, the military, and the cultivator. So that the clerical deals with the divine and possibly threats therefrom. The warriors deal with threats from humans, and the cultivators make sure that everybody is fed and prospering. And so this kind of functional society is to a certain extent reflected in their gods. Indo-European peoples tend to have gods that echo this kind of organization, and particularly Indo-European gods tend to have a sky father of some kind. So, if you're encountering a culture where the preeminent god is a sky god, often associated with thunder in particular, then you very likely have an Indo-European people. Again, Zeus and Jupiter are the obvious examples of this. Thor is also an echo of this. And the thunder god amongst the Hittites has the preeminent position amongst all the different gods that the Hittites have. There's also some interesting riddles that show up in multiple places. For example, a set of divine twins that you sometimes see. The Greeks and the Romans both have Castor and Pollux. This also shows up in Baltic versions of the pantheon, etc. The point is that the Indo-Europeans all become different peoples and create different cultures, but they bring with them a religious heritage that serves as a foundation for whatever understanding of the gods they develop. And this is true with the Hittites. So before I let you go, what's your impression of the Hittites so far, and how they think about the gods? If you were to say anything from this week's readings, what would you suggest about the Hittite religion? What stands out to you as being descriptive of how they deal with the gods? Remember, I said that the part of this is that the Hittite system is very vast. It combines a lot of gods from the Hittites themselves, so the Hittites come into this part of the world from the north, and they settle in Anatolia. And this land is already inhabited by the Hittites. And so the religious systems of the Hittites becomes integrates with the religious system of the Hittites. And then as the Hittites expand, they take in the Hurrians as well. And so the Hittites have this extremely vast, complex, multi-layered, multi-rite system. And as you see in this week's readings, they end up interacting with the gods on a very practical level. There's one statement in the instructions to the divine. Is the mind of a man different from the mind of a god? And the answer is no. And if we had more time, I would ask you what we mean by that. But the point of that is what? The point of that is that a god is appeased just like any human, any elite, any lord. To gain favors from the gods is the same as gaining favors from a lord. What you have to do is to make them happy and to create a transactional interaction to get from them in response to your benevolence, to get their benevolence in response to your paying favor to them. And so the interactions with the gods end up being very practical and pragmatic, and using this oracular divination in order to get the responses from the gods. Because the other thing is, humans speak to gods, but the Hittite gods don't speak directly back. And so the humans have to look for messages from the gods through divination. And that's what you're seeing in this week's reading, and that's what we'll discuss more in the online comments. So that's all of that. Have a good couple of weeks. Make sure to do this week's discussion, this week's quiz, and then you'll have the 2 weeks off. And in the meantime, I'll work a little bit more on the pacing of my lectures so that we can discuss all the topics that I'm aiming at. Normally I have 2 75-minute sessions a week, and I'm still getting used to only having one, but I'll be better when we come back. So we'll see you. I'll see you in 3 weeks.
Thank you.